Howdy everybody, this is Omar, your Audio Amigo, back with another Audio Amigo review for y'all. Tanchjim is no stranger to this channel, and their combination of value, build quality, and good tuning has made them a strong contender in the industry for quite a while. Today we're going to be looking at the Tanchjim Force, a $280 dual dynamic driver IEM with a collaboration cable from Effect Audio included in the box. Tanchjim is super well known for their single DD sets, so can they work their magic now that there's two of them? Well, let's see. Quick disclaimer, the Force here was sent to me by HiFiGo for review. I'm not being paid for this review, but because I could turn around and sell these if I wanted to, I've gone ahead and activated the paid promotion feature here on YouTube. I do these disclaimers because I believe in full transparency when there's potential bias besides my own personal taste at play. Thank you so much to HiFiGo for sending me these, and thank you to all of you watching for your continued support. Unboxing experience here on the Force will be very familiar to those of you who have a Kara or an Origin. You essentially get the same unboxing experience with the same nice white Tanchjim leather case. You get the little Tanchjim ear tip carriers with the same narrow and wide bore options, which is nice to see. You get a set of adapters for the modular cable. You get USB C 4.4 and 3.5, which is the one I have attached. And you get an awesome looking little waifu card, which I really like, fits the art on the box very nicely. Like that waifu stuff generally. The leather case is, the classic Tanchjim branded white leather case, the snap on the front, the soft padded inside. The crush resistance is decent actually, even when it's closed. It can't really crush it any more than that, so it'll hold up in the bottom of a piece of luggage or a backpack or something. It is a bit too large in my opinion to put in a pocket, but it's a standard Tanchjim white leather case. For 280 bucks, I feel like this is slightly barren in terms of accessories. I know a lot of this price is due to the cable, but I really would have liked some, nicer, maybe branded premium ear tips, some IEM booties or something else to protect those IEMs in this rather large case. But overall, accessories package, classic Tanchjim. Let's take a look at what puts the Effect Audio in the Effect Audio Force, that being the cable. This is a silvery sort of 4-wire twist with the same friction fit right angle amp connector that the rest of the Tanchjim cables have, like on the Origin and the Fission. This cable is prone to some memory, as you can see from just laying it there. It has some of the kinks from when I wrapped it here. It is a bit stiffer than I normally would like. It just seems to remember the curls from when I wrap it a bit too much. I do wish it was a bit more pliable, but it feels nice in the hands and it looks really nice. The connectors here are indexed the same way that all the rest of them are, so come on, there we go. You match the arrow up with the Tanchjim logo, and that goes on really easily. The Y split is pretty cool, honestly. It says Force on one side and Effect Audio on the other. Those look like microphone grills. I was not able to confirm if there in fact is a microphone in there, but I do like the Y split design generally. The chin slider is also really cool. It's sort of disguised as a strain relief, but it looks really at home when it's sitting there next to the Y split there. I like that. Ear hooks are comfortable, no crinkly noise on the hooks here, and the connectors blend in with the rest of the hardware, nothing too crazy here. You have little stereo indication dots on the front of the connectors there. These are recessed sockets, but this is Tanchjim, so I like using the very long connectors there. Overall, honestly, it doesn't really feel to me like this is an Effect Audio cable. I recently reviewed the light cables, and it doesn't have the same sort of feel or build as what I associate with Effect Audio. It feels to me more like Tanchjim took their existing hardware and then asked Effect Audio for some cabling to put in between. It does have some of the stiffness that I didn't like from the Aries, but it isn't as bad as the Aries. Still not what I personally would prefer. I personally have seen both better and worse cables at this price point. I would call this cable a bit below average at this price point, which is a real bummer considering that this is a cable collab IEM. When it comes to the construction and build quality, these break the Origin sort of fission tradition by being a dual material IEM. That makes them a lot more like the Kara. These are full 3D printed resin shells with metal faceplates, as you saw. The nozzles are resin and are part of the lower shells, and they have protective filters over the end, which is nice. Looking into the IEM, you can see the bass dynamic driver there and the treble dynamic driver there, as well as a bypass tube right there. That is the only ventilation for both of these drivers in terms of the front volume. That little bypass tube is enough. I got no real driver flex or pressure buildup issues while wearing the Force at all. And you can see from the back there that the faceplate is fully vented and it's connected to that rear volume that that tube leads to. This technically makes them open-backed IEMs, but I didn't get any appreciable sound bleed, and I didn't get any sort of extra spaciousness, at least nothing that I attribute to the ventilation. These are pretty wide, as you'll hear later, but I wouldn't really consider these IEMs true open-backs. The build overall is very solid, and I feel that Tanchjim has a great track record in terms of overall build quality and longevity, so I would expect these to last. But now we'll go ahead and pull up these specifications. As you saw earlier, the Force is rocking a pair of dynamic drivers. We have a 10mm titanium DMT4 driver for the lows and mids, and a dedicated 8mm beryllium DNT4 driver for the treble. Interestingly, despite this being a dual dynamic driver set, the Force doesn't really change sound when exposed to impedance adapters or higher output impedance sources. That, combined with the easy-to-drive nature of the Force, plus the fact that there's a USB C connector in the package, means that these will run well out of essentially anything with a headphone jack or a USB C port. Weight on the shells is right around 5.5 grams, and with the cable, the whole package comes to around 32 grams. Pretty lightweight overall for something everyday carry style. The nozzles are right at 6mm at their widest point, and the whole package honestly reads like a standard dual DD set, at least in terms of specifications. Let's go ahead and bring up the cool wall. I honestly really like the overall design of the Force here. I like how the shells are sort of asymmetric. That one says Force, that one says Tanchjim, making it relatively easy to distinguish left from right. The 3D printed lower shells with the clearly visible tubes and structures is always really cool for someone like me to see. I like the sort of pixelated, erratic look of the vents here on the faceplate. The branding, as I said, is really nice. I like the little cut here that sort of separates the vent from the sort of bottom of the IEM. I think the branding and the design is honestly really cool overall, and these will slide right into cool as far as I'm concerned. I think the design is super well. I like how the overall shape is classic Tanchjim, reminding you of the Origin, and then the sort of two-material nature reminds you of the Kara. Easy, you can show this to someone and be like, oh yeah, that's a Tanchjim IEM, no issues whatsoever. Now let's go ahead and check in with the Council of Ladies and see what they have to say about the Tanchjim Force. It's a positive-leaning verdict, but an inconclusive one. We have 2 pretties, 2 mez, and a single not pretty from lady number 4. Looking at compliments and conversation starters, it becomes a sort of 3-2 against this being a conversation starter or earning you any compliments. So I would say that while these aren't a massive hit with the ladies, they're also not terrible looking. Looking through their thoughts, it appears that the shape and design is what mostly gets positive marks, but I think that overall it might not be interesting enough for the ladies. It just doesn't generate enough excitement for them, I guess. The vents are a standout feature that they seem to talk about, but not enough to make these straight up pretty. When it comes to comfort, the Tanchjim Force boasts a similar shape to the rest of the Tanchjim family. It's not a semi-custom shell, there's no wing or valley here. It's got a very prominent driver funnel, but there's nothing in terms of bulges or sharp edges here that would interfere with the comfort. I was able to wear these for long periods of time. That was helped by the lightweight and the relatively standard nozzle dimensions. Only real issue I had was these would give me too deep of a fit sometimes. It would fold my stock ear tips, but it wasn't an issue once I realized where the happy spot for the seal was. As far as my wife and her tiny ears go, the Force actually earned a full pass. She was able to fit them in her ears easily with no issues, and even while eating, talking, laughing, the seal stayed put, and they did not fall out, and they were reasonably comfortable, hence the full-on pass in terms of comfort. So, well done, Tanchjim. Good score from the tiny-eared wife there. Before we jump into the audio segment, I wanted to discuss the 2 different sounds this IEM technically comes with. Basically, the analog adapters, the 4.4 and the 3.5, have a slightly different sound from the USB C adapter, which does apply a DSP correction to the sound signature. That correction graphs roughly like this. These 2 sounds are generally very similar, but there is a noticeable difference to me. I'll talk about it a little bit more in the audio section, but essentially the USB C connector here sounds less shouty and less sharp with female and some instrument harmonics to my ears, at least compared to the standard analog sound. It is the sound that I prefer, but honestly, most of the players and the standard devices that I use to test audio, using USB-C is not the most convenient for me. It's just like my 2 phones and my tablets that have that I can use. So honestly, I went with the standard analog sound for the rest of this review, as well as the comparisons. USB-C does work with the Tanchjim app. You can change the sound to basically be whatever you want using its 5-band PEQ feature. so you can tweak that however you want, but that's enough about the USB-C connector. Let's get into talking about the bass. Bass here on the Force is kind of interesting. It doesn't feel boosted or super energetic, but it has a nice textured punchiness to it. The rumble is not the strongest I've ever heard, but it can be pretty dynamic with the right tracks or the right bass hits. Tiesto's remix of Faded is, I feel, right where this set is the happiest. The bass notes here are punchy and aggressive. I do feel like the decay or rumble on the tail end of some of the lower notes is a little bit muted. It does noticeably better with bouncier, punchier notes as opposed to the lower sort of droning, super deep notes. Those can get a little bit soft in both the attack and the decay, and it's overall not my preference. I always had a little bit more dynamism there. Bass guitars and kick drums have decent energy to them, but they don't dominate the replays overall. Do You Wanna Funk, for example, still has some decent low-end energy. The synth bass and the kick drum have good authority, but I would have preferred a little bit more funkiness from the bass guitar in particular. The drums, however, hit nicely, and it helps this replay sound engaging and not overly thin in the low end. Overall, I would call the bass a little uneven, but when it's at its best, it can be fun and engaging, and when it's at its worst, I think it's still decent, just a little soft around the edges. The mid-range on the Force is very clean and clear, mostly down to a prominent dip in the lower mids that has the effect of sort of lightening the whole range up nicely. Personally, I think it's a little bit too lean and a little bit too thin sounding on some tracks, but there is still some life in the music. Don't You from Simple Minds, for example. The drums and the bass here still have a nice warmth to them. The vocals are clear, the keyboards are very prominent, the synthesizers are well rendered, and there's zero issues with masking going on here. Overall, the track just feels a little bit lighter and sort of less full and less impactful than I typically prefer, but it's still a good replay. Female vocals are a focus of this set, like it can be on some other Tanchjim sets, and those clearer lower mids help them pop forward a bit more compared to some other Tanchjim sets. Claris's Hitorigoto, for example, was all about the ladies' vocals. They have their harmonics and their backing vocals coming forward, and the instrumentation sort of sits behind in a nice way. Their vocals aren't what I would call unnaturally forward or forced forward to where they start sort of drowning out the instruments. They are forward enough just so where they start to enjoy some of that extra focus and extra emphasis that I like. The mid-range overall is well-tuned, but I really wish it had a little bit more body in the lower mids to help give tracks and other instruments a little bit more weight. As I mentioned earlier, the upper mids here on the Force can come across as a little shouty, especially if you're sensitive to that tonality in female vocals. Some of them did get slightly nasally, but it wasn't in a really annoying sense. Girls Just Want to Have Fun, for example, the harmonics that Cyndi Lauper throws off with her vocals are excitable, they're energetic. They might go just a step too far with some of her higher notes, especially if you're sensitive to shout. I would definitely tread lightly with this set if you are sensitive, or just use the USB-C connector. It is much more palatable. It turns things down a little bit and makes the vocal harmonics a little bit less intense, and you can always turn that down even more if you feel like in the Tanchjim app. As we move into the treble, instrument harmonics are honestly really smooth and really well controlled, but there's enough sizzle and sparkle hit here that, for example, Michael Jackson's Don't Stop Till You Get Enough has good dynamism and decay and washiness to the cymbals and those very intense bottle hits that are throughout the track. Those bottle hits I was talking about, they never get piercing, but they definitely have some energy to them that cuts through the sound in a pleasing way and in a way that I think it was mastered to do. Some people will want a little more treble energy out of this. Some instruments, I think, do decay a little bit fast in their harmonics, but overall, I think the treble is very well controlled and mostly safe, even with the more aggressive analog tuning. The technical performance here on the Force is decent. The bass dynamic driver is a pretty good one, and it resolves low-end details quite well, even if it does lack some texture on those lower notes, as I was talking about. Massive Attack's Angel has those droning, deep bass notes. I felt here on the Force they were sort of bleeding into each other a little bit. The decay was slow enough that I felt the next note was starting before the next one had really ended. And while they do sort of play over each other a little bit, there wasn't any finality to the notes. The notes were resolved though, so that's something. The clear mid-range here is great for making out most of the glassware moments in Waltz for Debbie, but I was missing a little bit of the sparkle on some of those higher glassware notes, as well as some of the more prominent background conversation moments that I typically tend to listen for. I would say in terms of overall technical performance compared to other double dynamic driver sets, this is ahead of basically everything except for maybe the Fat Freak Deuce. However, compared to some of the hybrid and tribrid sets in this price range, such as the Crescent, the 224, the K9. This clearly feels like a step behind those in terms of technicalities. The stereo separation and perceived 3D soundstage, however, is excellent on the Force. I don't know if it's these sort of open back-ish shells or if it's just the tuning, but fun stereo tracks like Habit have a whole lot of width to them with no real closed-in feeling or compressed sound to the individual guitars in each ear or the vocals that jump back and forth. Overall replay on stereo tracks like this is excellent. The perceived 3D soundstage is also awesome. You've got Fleetwood Mac's Dreams having really nice layering. The imaging of all the instruments, the bass, the guitars, the drums, the vocals, they all have their own individual space, and the chorus in particular has this sense of depth to the sound. Overall, I think that this sort of perceived 3D soundstage is one of the strongest points of the Force. I would definitely say it's above average, even among sort of the other IEMs at this price point. The Tanchjim Force, then. It's a bright-leaning neutral signature, which I feel like is a bit of a departure from the typical like Tanchjim tuning. I'll go ahead and pull up a graph here of some of the other Tanchjim sets I have. It's clearly going for a leaner, cleaner, brighter sound that is more on the sort of resolving technical side of things compared to some of their other sets, for example. As I said, the bass and lower mids are a little on the leaner side, especially if you're used to the richer sound of things like the Origin, the Fission, or the FiiO. This is a very different tuning. It's not exactly uncommon at this price point, however. I have lined up some things that are different overall, some that are sort of similar, and one of these IEMs I think sort of spells disaster or is at least a very big problem for the Force, so we'll go ahead and get into it. We'll start with something that's a bit more different than similar, that being the Truthear Nova. Oop, there we go. Priced at $150 US. While I would say that the Nova is a good bit more V-shaped than the Force, their treatment of female vocals is relatively similar in that they both have that borderline shouty, very exciting vocal sound that some people will absolutely love and some people will absolutely hate. The Nova does balance that out a little bit better with more overall bass. It's punchier, more dynamic, and I would say of a similar quality. If you perceive details in the lower treble, you might see the Nova as a bit more detailed than the Force. The Force is definitely of these two the more neutral sounding set, but it's also nearly double the price of the Nova. So if you want a more V-shaped dynamic sounding set, the Nova could be a more affordable alternative. Let's get generally into the price range for the Force with the Ziigaat Arete, priced at $250 US. This is their collaboration set with Fresh Reviews. Personally, I feel like the Arete matches or exceeds the Force in terms of imaging and perceived soundstage. That's where both of these IEMs I feel excel the most. At least in my testing, I did prefer the staging on the Arete. The Force, however, was much more satisfying with female vocals. Even if it did get borderline shouty at times, that USB C connector sort of mellowed it out, and it was just better with female vocals, in my opinion, than the Arete here. The Arete is the airier, more detailed set. It is harder hitting in the bass. It has a much nicer, richer tonality to those lower mids. The Force, on the other hand, is cleaner. So honestly, it's just going to depend on your preference here. If you like your soundstage to have more warmth and a bit less focus on female vocals, go for Arete. If you want your soundstage to be a bit more female vocal focused and a bit lighter, go for the Force. Honestly speaking, though, if you have $250 to spend and you want a bright-leaning, neutral-tuned set with clean lower mids that's very light on its feet, I would actually steer you more towards the Letshuoer Cadenza 4, priced at $250 US. I mentioned this earlier, but I think that the Cadenza 4 is the set that provides the sort of biggest problem or biggest fly in the ointment for the Force here. A-Being these two was quite interesting. The bass, on some songs I found that the Cadenza 4 was the harder hitting one. This one in general resolved lower notes better. It had better rumble. The attack and decay on bass notes was a bit more satisfying here. However, on other tracks, the Force here had just better punchiness. Over the rest of the range, however, I found myself preferring the Cadenza 4 basically during all of my A-B testing. This had a bit richer lower mids, which sort of took away some of that flaw that I had here on the Force. This had the same sort of satisfying vocals, just without the shoutiness potential, and this had a bit brighter, more resolving, slightly sparklier treble. The Tanchjim here is a bit safer if you are treble sensitive in that like lower to mid treble area, and it is slightly more soundstagey, but it isn't a massive difference. The Cadenza 4 is also pretty good at that. The carrying case here is a bit more crush resistant. The cable, in my opinion, is nicer, and I prefer the fit on this as well. The Force, however, is a good buy if you prefer that sort of dynamic driver tonality, but if you don't care about balanced armature sort of timbre, I would tell you save the $30 and just go with the Cadenza over the Force. Lastly, however, closest in price to the Force, we have the MyerAudio SLIIVO SL224, priced at $270 US. Now, my SL224 literally left a couple days ago on loan. However, before it left, I did manage to do my A-B comparisons with the Force, so everything I'm going to be talking about is based on my actual A-B listening impressions. Standing in for the 224 today will be the SLT6, my other MyerAudio set. So the 224 is what I would say a generally warmer overall tune compared to the Force, but it still retains some of that brightness in the treble that lends it some edge to vocals and some extra sparkle with instrument harmonics. It's not as vocal forward as the Force, but the bass is just overall more to my preference in every single way. The 224's bass was more dynamic, more textured, and just better overall in terms of quality and quantity, at least to me, compared to the Force. It is also the more technical sounding set. If you want a better performance with female vocals and you prefer those leaner, cleaner lower mids, then the Force is an option here. Again, like with the Cadenza 4, it's also an option if you have issues with microplanar or balanced armature timbre, specifically in the treble. This will be a safer overall set compared to the 224 if that is the case, but honestly, $10 less, the 224 looks like an absolute monster next to the Force. Of everything on the table, the Force has the leanest, cleanest lower mids, and depending on the song, the least intense bass. It also has the most forward female vocals, with borderline shouty harmonics on those vocals. If you're looking for a similar sound but want more consistent bass, a better technical performance, and also a slightly lower price, the Cadenza 4 I think can make a great alternative, and it has a better cable, at least in my opinion. The SL224 is a step up in warmth, and it's also, in my opinion, the most technical IEM on the table. It's just a really nice, well-rounded set. The Nova is more classic Harman in its tuning, and it is warmer as a result. It's also got some shout factor in the upper mids with female vocals. It's also got a bit more treble energy, helping it come across a bit more V-shaped compared to everything else on the table. It is also the cheapest, and it tends to go on sale fairly frequently. Finally, you have the Arete, a warmish neutral set with great imaging and sort of soundstage performance, but it does have toned back vocal harmonics, making it come across overall warmer compared to the rest of the sets on this table. The Force then is light, lean, and clean, but compared to a lot of the sets in this price range, I do think it can come across a hair too light and lean. Before we go any further though, let's pull out the Audio Amigo Arbitrary rating scale and see how the Force is going to stack up. The Force is generally a solid IEM. It's got good sound, good looks, decent accessories, and a great looking waifu on the box. As far as I see it, there are a few issues with the Force, however, and all of them end up being caused by the fact that this is a collaboration with a cable company rather than a standard Tanchjim release. For some reason, I feel like all of the cable collab IEMs that I have tried in the recent past have been rather disappointing from a cable and value perspective. Be it Vortex cables, Flash Acoustics, or Effect Audio, it just seems like all a cable collaboration does is raise the price of a set and make it less competitive in its price bracket. Plus, it also gives you the potential for a disappointing cable. The Force here is no exception. The cable is rather stiff, and while it looks nice, I can't help but wonder what the price of this set would be without the Effect Audio collaboration. The fact of the matter is, the $250 to $300 price bracket is absolutely overcrowded with high-quality, technically strong, greatly tuned IEMs. Yes, Tanchjim did go for a slightly different tuning compared to the sort of crowd of meta-ish sounding IEMs that so many other companies are putting out, but there are other options like the Cadenza 4 at this price point that offer a similar sound and a better value. The Force still has a couple things going for it. That USB connector with the app functionality is really nice. Even if it's only a 5-band PEQ, that's enough to let you tailor your sound slightly towards your tastes. Also, everything else in this price range is essentially something that has balanced armatures or microplanars in it. This is full dynamic drivers. And it's also one of the nicest bright-leaning dual dynamic driver sets I've ever heard. And while the price is fairly high, it does have that nice traditional Tanchjim build quality and level of overall polish to it. While this isn't a bad IEM, I think it's actually a pretty good IEM. I don't think it necessarily competes well within its price point, but I could see some people picking this up for its dual DD nature in combination with that clean, detailed sound with solid imaging and great staging. At the end of the day, I'll be putting this in, but I like this. I do, however, have to immediately wonder, if Tanchjim had bundled this with their Cable X or a variation of the cable that comes with the Fission, would the price be closer to $200 or even under $200? Because at that price point, I think that this set starts to make a lot more sense, at least to me personally. So time for my recommendation then. I would say that the Force isn't for you if you are a bass head or a treble head. It's just a little bit too restrained in the bass, a little bit too soft, and the treble, while very smooth and decently resolving, just isn't sparkly enough for people who want that sort of thing. I also don't think that this is for people who are sensitive to shouty tonality for female vocals, unless you use that USB-C connector all the time or use it to adjust the sound in the app. I also don't think that this is for anybody who is looking for the absolute best or the most technical sound at $280, as honestly that price range is chock full of really great offerings from all sorts of brands that are much more technical sounding than this. However, if you're the type of person who prefers the all dynamic driver sound and you're looking for a well-balanced, clean, bright-leaning IEM, you'd be hard-pressed to do better than the Force. I would also say that this is a great option if you want an IEM that can sort of pull double duty as an everyday carry IEM and a home office IEM. Since the swappable connectors give it a little bit of flexibility, you can go with the 4.4 at home at your desk. You can go with the USB-C on the go. Honestly, I quite like the Force. I just wished it was priced in such a way that made it more competitive with other things. And that's going to do it for the Tanchjim Force. In my opinion, a pretty well executed dual dynamic driver set. I just really wish it came with a standard Tanchjim cable and a cheaper price to make it more competitive with other things on the market. Coming up, we've got the first homegrown IEM from MyerAudio, the Rock Lobster, so stay tuned for that one. As usual, thank you all so very, very much for watching. I really appreciate all the continued support. Massive shout out to all of the Compadres Club members. Remember, $5 a month and you get to decide what I review with your money, and you help make the channel more independent, less reliant on samples and tours, which I really, really appreciate. Speaking of appreciate, I really hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. This has been Omar with Audio Amigo Reviews, and I will catch you all next time.